When Evelyn Shaw stepped off that stagecoach and lifted her veil, wealthy rancher Caleb Harlan froze. Her burn-scarred face wasn't what he expected from a mail-order bride. She offered to leave immediately, contract void. He said stay. But when the whole town called their marriage charity, and he couldn't answer one simple question, "Do you regret me?" she vanished by dawn. Now Caleb must choose: hide behind fear forever, or stand in front of everyone and speak the truth that terrifies him most. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Evelyn and Caleb's story travels. And if this story moves you, hit that like button and settle in, because what happens next will break your heart before it heals it. The Montana prairies stretched endless beneath the early summer sun, a sea of golden grass rippling under wind that carried the scent of dust, sage, and something sweeter, wildflowers blooming in hidden places where water gathered. The sky hung pale and enormous, the kind of sky that made a man feel small no matter how much land he owned. And Caleb Harlan owned plenty. His ranch house rose solid and square against that vast horizon, 2 stories of timber and stone built to last generations. The porch wrapped around 3 sides, wide enough for rocking chairs and summer evenings, though those chairs sat empty now. They'd been empty for 3 years. Caleb stood at the porch railing, one boot propped on the lower board, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold an hour ago. He was 34 but looked older, not from hard living, but from hard silence. The kind that settled into a man's bones when he spent too many nights in a house built for family, now occupied by ghosts and regrets. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and capable. With dark hair he kept trimmed short and eyes the color of creek water in shadow. Women in town still looked at him, still brought casseroles to church suppers with hopeful smiles. He accepted them with polite distance and took the dishes home to eat alone. The arrangement had been practical. That's what he told himself when he'd placed the advertisement 6 months ago. Widowed rancher seeks companionship. Household management. No expectations beyond mutual respect. He'd been careful with the words, making sure they promised nothing he couldn't deliver. Safety and boundaries. Comfort and clarity. 23 women had written back. He'd chosen Evelyn Shaw because her letter had been the most honest. No flowery language about destiny or fresh starts. Just simple sentences about loss, solitude, and the practical need for security. She was a widow too. She understood that some partnerships weren't about love, they were about survival. The stage was late. Caleb squinted toward the road where heat shimmered over packed earth, making the horizon waver like something from a dream or a mirage. He'd checked his pocket watch 3 times in the last hour, though time moved the same whether he watched it or not. Behind him, the house waited. Clean floors, fresh linens. A room prepared on the far side of the upstairs hall, far enough for respect, close enough to be proper. Everything ready for a woman he'd never met, who'd agreed to marry a man she'd never seen because sometimes loneliness made people do practical things that felt impossible to explain. Then he saw it, a dark speck against all that gold, growing larger as it rolled toward him through waves of heat. The stagecoach. His chest tightened, though whether from anticipation or dread he couldn't say. Maybe both. He set the cold coffee on the railing and straightened his vest, ran one hand through his hair. Ridiculous. She'd agreed to this arrangement knowing nothing about him except what fit in a letter. His appearance wouldn't matter. This wasn't courtship. This was contract. The stage rattled closer, pulled by 6 horses dark with sweat, their sides heaving. The driver, old Tom Hutchins, who'd been running this route for 20 years, raised one hand in greeting as the wheels crunched to a stop in front of the porch. Dust billowed and settled. "Afternoon, Caleb," Tom's voice rasped from years of shouting over wind and horses. "Got a delivery for you." Caleb's throat went dry. He nodded, suddenly unable to form words. The stage door swung open. For a long moment, nothing happened. Caleb could hear his own heartbeat, the creak of leather, the restless stamp of horses. Then a hand appeared on the door frame, small, gloved in dark fabric, and a woman stepped down into the Montana sunlight. She wore black, full black despite the summer heat, a traveling dress with long sleeves and high collar, the kind of outfit meant for morning or winter, completely wrong for June on the prairie. A heavy veil hung from her hat, obscuring her face entirely. The the dark netting dense enough that Caleb couldn't make out even a silhouette of features beneath. She stood very still beside the coach, one hand still gripping the doorframe as if deciding whether to climb back inside. Medium height, slender build. That was all he could determine through the layers of fabric. "Ma'am." Tom climbed down from the driver's seat, moving to retrieve luggage from the back. "This is the Harlan Ranch. Caleb, there's been waiting on you." Caleb descended the porch steps, his boots loud against the wood. He stopped a respectful distance away, hat in hand though he couldn't remember removing it. "Miss Shaw?" "Mrs. Shaw." Her voice came muffled through the veil, but he caught the correction clearly enough. Low voice, steady, Eastern accent, Boston maybe, or somewhere in that direction. "Mrs. Shaw," he amended. "Welcome. I hope the journey wasn't too difficult." "It was long." She released the doorframe and turned toward him, though the veil still hid everything. "Mr. Harlan, before we proceed any further, I need to be certain you understand the terms we discussed." "Yes, ma'am. I have the contract inside. Not the legal terms." She interrupted him, which surprised him. Most women he knew were too polite for that, or too trained in deference. "The personal ones. I wrote you very specifically about my circumstances." Caleb's mind raced back through her letters. She was a widow. He remembered that clearly. Her husband had died 4 years ago. No children. No family willing to support her. She'd been working as a seamstress in Philadelphia but could barely afford rent. She needed security. He needed someone to fill the silence. "I remember," he said carefully, "you were very clear in your letters." "Was I?" Something sharp edged her tone. "Then you'll understand why I need to do this before we go any further." She reached up and unpinned her hat. Tom Hutchins had finished unloading 2 battered trunks and a carpet bag. He tipped his hat to them both. "I'll be heading back to town then. Good luck to you both." He climbed back onto the driver's seat and snapped the reins. The stagecoach rolled away in a cloud of dust, leaving them alone in the vast quiet of the prairie. Evelyn Shaw lifted her veil. Caleb's breath caught. The left side of her face was beautiful, fine-boned and pale, with a straight nose and dark eyes that held his steadily. But the right side was a landscape of scars. Burn scars, he realized. They spread from her temple down to her jaw, pulling the skin tight in some places and puckering it in others, transforming what might have been symmetry into something entirely different. The scars continued down her neck and disappeared beneath her collar. He stared. He knew he was staring, knew it was the worst possible reaction, but he couldn't seem to stop. His face must have shown everything he was thinking because her expression, what he could read of it, went completely flat. "I wrote you about the fire." Her voice stayed level, almost clinical. "I explained that I was badly burned, that my appearance had been permanently affected." Had she? Caleb's mind scrambled through the letters again. She'd mentioned a fire. He remembered that now, though the details were hazy. He'd read it and moved on, focused more on her practical skills and her understanding of what he needed. He'd assumed, what? A small scar? Something easily hidden? This wasn't hidden. This couldn't be hidden. "You wrote that you understood," Evelyn continued, still in that same eerily calm voice. "That you weren't looking for conventional beauty, that you needed a capable household manager and companion, not a decorative wife." "I did," Caleb managed. His voice came out rough. "I meant it." "Did you?" She tilted her head, studying him with those dark eyes. "Because the expression on your face suggests otherwise." Shame heated his neck. He'd spent 3 years alone convincing himself he was beyond such shallow concerns, that losing Catherine had taught him what truly mattered. And now here he stood, proved a liar in the first 30 seconds. "I apologize," he said. "You're right. I didn't expect—" He stopped, took a breath. "That was wrong of me." "Honesty is better than politeness, Mr. Harlan." Evelyn reached down and picked up her carpet bag. "I'll stay tonight at the hotel in town. Tomorrow I'll take the stage back to the rail junction. We can agree the contract is void, no fault, no obligation." "Wait. There's no shame in it," she continued as if he hadn't spoken. "You expected one thing. I understand that. This arrangement won't work if you can't look at me without—" She gestured at his face. "That," Caleb looked at her, truly looked, forcing himself past the initial shock. Her shoulders were set square despite the heavy dress. Her chin lifted at a defiant angle. She held her carpetbag with white-knuckled fingers, but her voice never wavered. She was giving him an out, making it easy for him, and he understood with sudden clarity that she'd done this before, offered people the chance to turn away, made it simple for them to choose retreat. How many times? How many people had taken that easy path? "No," he said. She blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said no." Caleb set his hat back on his head and moved to pick up one of her trunks. Heavy. "You came all this way. I made you a promise. We made promises to each other. I'm not backing out because I'm a damned fool who doesn't pay attention to important details in letters." "Mr. Harlan, and you're not staying at the hotel." He hauled the trunk toward the porch. "That'll just start talk, and we don't need that. You'll stay here. We agreed to a 2-week period before making the final decision. That still stands." "Even looking like this?" The question came out sharp, challenging. Caleb set the trunk down and turned to face her. The summer wind pushed hot air between them, carrying the scent of her travel dust and his own nervous sweat. "You wrote in your letters that you could cook, clean, mend, manage a household, and keep decent company. None of that requires a face like a painting. So yes, even looking like this." For a long moment she just stared at him, and he couldn't read her expression at all. Then, slowly, she nodded. 2 weeks. Trial period. If either of us wants to end the arrangement, we do so honestly and part on good terms. Agreed. I'll need my own room. Already prepared, upstairs, end of the hall. I do my own washing. There's a tub in the mudroom. I don't expect romance, Mr. Harlan. I don't expect tenderness or affection or any of those things people write about in novels. I expect respect and honesty, that's all. The words should have been a relief. Instead, they settled into his chest like stones. Understood. Evelyn walked past him onto the porch, her skirts rustling against the boards. She paused at the front door, one gloved hand on the frame, and looked back at him. "You should know, people will talk. They'll say terrible things. About me, about you, about this arrangement. If you can't handle that, we should end this now." Caleb thought about the last 3 years. The whispers at church, the pitying looks, the way people stopped talking when he entered the general store. He'd survived worse than gossip. "Let them talk," he said. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe? Or the beginning of respect. She nodded once and opened the door, stepping into the house he'd built for a life that had died 3 years ago. Caleb stood in the hot sun for a moment longer, looking at those 2 trunks that held everything this woman owned in the world. Then he picked up the second trunk and followed her inside. The house was exactly what Evelyn had expected, clean, well-maintained, and utterly devoid of warmth. She stood in the front hall while her eyes adjusted to the dimmer light, taking in the details. Hardwood floors, recently swept, a staircase leading up to the second floor. Rooms opening off to either side, parlor on the left, what looked like a dining room on the right. Everything in its place. Nothing on the walls, no photographs, no paintings, no decorative touches of any kind. A dead woman's house, Evelyn thought, or a house where a woman had died and taken all the living parts with her. "Kitchen's through there," Caleb gestured past the dining room. "Mudroom and washing tub just beyond that. There's a hand pump inside, so you don't have to go to the well for every bucket." Convenient. Evelyn set her carpetbag on the floor and began unbuttoning her gloves. Her fingers ached from gripping the handle too tight during the confrontation outside, but she kept her movements steady and precise. "I'll show you upstairs." Caleb headed for the stairs, still carrying her trunk like it weighed nothing. Big man, strong. She'd noticed that immediately, hard not to, when he stood a full head taller than her and had shoulders like a barn door. Not that it mattered. She wasn't here for his appearance any more than he was here for hers. She followed him up the stairs, her hand trailing along a banister worn smooth with use. The upstairs hallway ran the length of the house, with 4 doors opening off it. Caleb stopped at the farthest one and pushed it open. "This is yours." The room was simple but adequate. A bed with a plain quilt, a dresser, a washstand with pitcher and basin, a window that looked out over the prairie, currently letting in squares of honey-colored sunlight. Clean, empty, waiting. There's space in the dresser and the wardrobe. But Caleb set the trunk at the foot of the bed. I'll bring up the other trunk and leave you to settle in. Supper's at 6 if you're hungry. Otherwise, I'll leave a plate for you on the stove. He was already halfway out the door when Evelyn spoke. Mr. Harlan? He stopped, turned. Thank you. She kept her voice neutral, her face carefully blank. For not taking the easy path. His jaw worked for a moment. Don't thank me yet. We've got 2 weeks to prove this can work. We might both be wishing I'd let you go by the end of it. Then he was gone, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Evelyn waited until she heard the front door open and close before she allowed herself to move. She walked to the window and looked out at the endless prairie, at the big sky and the rolling grass and the vast emptiness of it all. No crowds, no pointing fingers, no children running away screaming or women clutching their babies tighter when she walked past. Just space. Dangerous, beautiful space. She touched her scarred cheek with gentle fingers, tracing the familiar landscape of ruined skin. 4 years since the fire. 4 years of Pittsburgh's narrow streets and cramped boarding houses, of working by lamplight so customers didn't have to look at her face, of men proposing marriage out of pity or worse, fetish. This was different. This was a business arrangement. Caleb Harlan might have been shocked, might have stared, but he hadn't run, hadn't offered false comfort or religious platitudes about God's plan. He'd been honest about his reaction and then chosen to honor his word anyway. That was more than most people managed. Evelyn turned from the window and began unpacking her trunk with efficient movements. Black dresses, dark shawls, a few white shirts for housework. Everything practical, nothing frivolous. Her entire life condensed into 2 trunks and a carpet bag. She found the marriage contract at the bottom of the trunk, folded carefully between layers of fabric. The paper felt crisp beneath her fingers. She'd read it so many times she had it memorized, but she unfolded it anyway and scanned the terms again. Joint partnership, shared household responsibilities, separate bedrooms. No expectations of physical intimacy unless mutually agreed. Either party may dissolve the arrangement within the first 2 weeks without penalty. After 2 weeks, marriage becomes legally binding and may only be dissolved through standard legal channels. Simple, clear, safe. She refolded the contract and placed it in the top dresser drawer, then continued unpacking. Her sewing kit, her few books, the silver brush that had been her mother's, the only piece of her old life she'd kept. She set it on the dresser and stared at it for a long moment, remembering a different woman in a different mirror, back when her face was whole and her future looked nothing like this. Stop it, she said aloud. Her voice sounded too loud in the quiet room. That woman is dead. You're what's left. A knock at the front door interrupted her thoughts. She heard Caleb's footsteps below, the creak of hinges, then voices, male voices. One she recognized as Caleb's, the other unfamiliar. Evelyn moved to the top of the stairs and listened. Just wanted to come by and welcome her properly. The unfamiliar voice had an edge to it, something that made Evelyn's instincts prickle. Whole town's buzzing about your mail-order bride, Caleb. Figured I'd get a look before Sunday service. She's tired from traveling, Vance. Caleb's voice stayed level, but Evelyn heard the tension beneath it. Maybe another time. Oh, come on, just a quick hello. I brought pie. A pause. Martha made it special. Tell Martha I appreciate it, but there's something wrong with her? The man, Vance, lowered his voice, but not enough. She hiding upstairs for a reason? She's sick? Crazy? What'd you get yourself into, Caleb? Silence. Then Caleb very quietly, Get off my porch, Vance. Just asking questions any reasonable person would ask. Now. More silence. Then footsteps. The front door closed with a definitive thunk. Evelyn stayed at the top of the stairs, her hand gripping the banister. So it was starting already. She'd expected it. Gossip followed her like smoke, but she'd hoped for at least a day before the vultures began circling. Caleb appeared at the bottom of the stairs and looked up at her. Their eyes met across the distance. That was Vance Crowley, he said. He owns the ranch north of here. We're not friendly. He seemed interested in meeting me. He's interested in everyone's business but his own. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck. I should warn you, tomorrow's Sunday. People will expect us at church. If you're not ready for that, we can skip it. And give them more to talk about? Evelyn descended the stairs slowly, one hand trailing the banister. No, we'll go. I'd rather face them all at once than draw it out. Caleb studied her for a long moment. You've done this before. It wasn't a question. Evelyn reached the bottom of the stairs and smoothed her skirts. I've been a public spectacle for 4 years, Mr. Harlan. I know how people react. Better to meet it head on than hide and let imagination make it worse. They'll be cruel. People usually are. She moved past him toward the kitchen. Now, you mentioned supper at 6. I should see what provisions you have and plan something appropriate. Evelyn, Mrs. Shaw, she corrected gently. At least until we sign the papers. He nodded slowly. Mrs. Shaw, you don't have to prove anything tonight. You just got here. I'm not trying to prove anything. She paused in the kitchen doorway and looked back at him. I'm trying to earn my place. There's a difference. The kitchen was larger than she'd expected. A big cast-iron stove, a sturdy table, cabinets along one wall, and windows that let in the late afternoon light. Clean, like the rest of the house, but basic. A man's kitchen. Functional, but joyless. She found the pantry well stocked with basics: flour, beans, salt pork, dried vegetables. A root cellar accessible through a trapdoor held potatoes, onions, and what looked like last year's canned goods. Not much in the way of fresh food, but enough to work with. Evelyn tied on an apron she found hanging by the door and got to work. So, Caleb sat at his desk in the small room off the parlor he used as an office, trying and failing to focus on ledgers. Numbers blurred on the page. His mind kept circling back to the woman in his kitchen, to the sound of cabinet doors opening and closing, to the smell of something cooking that wasn't beans from a can. He'd stared at her. Like a damn fool, he'd stood there and stared. In his defense, he'd truly thought he understood what she meant in her letters. Burns, permanent scarring. He'd imagined something minor, a mark on her arm maybe, something hidden by long sleeves. He hadn't expected half her face to look like melted wax. And the worst part? The absolute worst part? After the shock faded, after he'd had a moment to actually see her instead of just seeing the scars, she wasn't ugly. Different, yes. Startling. But there was something in her eyes, in the set of her shoulders, in the way she'd offered him an easy out and then respected him for not taking it. Catherine had been beautiful. Conventionally, undeniably beautiful, with golden hair and blue eyes and a smile that could charm birds from trees. Everyone had said so. Everyone had envied him. Everyone had also said she'd married beneath her station, that she deserved better than a rough rancher, that he'd gotten lucky beyond his worth. Maybe they'd been right. A knock on the office door pulled him from his thoughts. Yes? Evelyn's voice came through the wood. Supper's ready, if you want to eat. I'll be right there. He set down his pen and stood, rolling his shoulders to release the tension. Through the window, the sun was starting its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of amber and gold. Beautiful land. Empty land. He'd chosen it for exactly that reason after Catherine died, space enough to grieve without witnesses. Now he'd invited someone into that space, someone who looked at him with dark, knowing eyes and asked for nothing but honesty. He had a feeling honesty was going to be harder than he'd anticipated. The kitchen table had been set simply: 2 plates, 2 forks, 2 cups of water. No fuss, no decoration. The food, though. Caleb felt his stomach wake up at the sight of it. Fresh biscuits, fried salt pork with gravy, stewed potatoes with onions. It wasn't fancy, but it was real food, not the barely edible combinations he'd been throwing together for 3 years. I hope it's adequate. Evelyn stood by the stove, her hands clasped in front of her. She'd changed out of her traveling dress into something simpler, a dark gray work dress with the sleeves rolled to her elbows. Without the heavy fabric around her neck, he could see the burn scars continued down to her collarbone. I worked with what was available. It's more than adequate. Caleb pulled out his chair and sat, suddenly aware he should have offered to seat her first. Catherine would have expected that. But Evelyn was already seating herself, her movements efficient and practical. They ate in silence for a while. The food was good, better than good. The biscuits were light, the gravy had actual flavor, and the potatoes were cooked through but not mushy. Competent cooking, the work of someone who'd been taking care of themselves for a long time. "This is excellent," Caleb said finally. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Evelyn cut her pork into precise, small pieces. "I'll inventory the pantry tomorrow and make a list of supplies we'll need. When do you typically go into town?" "Saturdays, usually, but I can make a special trip if—" "Saturday is fine." She took a sip of water. "I'll have a complete list by then. And I should warn you, I'm particular about my kitchen. If we're going to do this, I'll need certain things organized a certain way." The way she said it, matter of fact, no apology, made something ease in Caleb's chest. "That's fair. I'm not much of a cook anyway. I mostly just survive." I noticed. The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Your spice shelf is offensive." "Offensive?" "Everything's just thrown in together. No organization. Salt next to cinnamon, next to who knows what. It's chaos. I can usually find what I need. Eventually, after searching." She met his eyes across the table. "I'll fix it tomorrow." It should have felt intrusive, the stranger coming into his house and rearranging things. Instead, it felt like something waking up, like the house taking a breath after holding still for 3 years. "You mentioned you were a seamstress in Philadelphia," Caleb said. "You give that up to come here?" "I gave up a 6x8 room in a boarding house where the walls were so thin I could hear every conversation 3 rooms over. I gave up sewing by lamplight until my eyes burned because customers didn't want to visit during the day. I gave up pretending I was fine with a life that was slowly suffocating me." She set down her fork. "So, yes, I gave it up. Gladly." The bitterness in her voice was raw, unguarded. Caleb recognized it. He'd heard the same tone in his own voice when people asked about Catherine, back when the grief was fresh and people wouldn't stop asking. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Don't be. I made my choice. I'm here because I want to be, not because I had no other options." She paused. "Though I'll admit the options were limited. Still, it's brave, coming out here to marry a stranger. Brave or desperate?" She picked up her fork again. "Sometimes they look similar." They finished eating in companionable silence. Evelyn cleared the plates and set them in a basin by the sink, then filled the basin with hot water from the stove's reservoir. "I'll wash these," she said. "You don't have to help." "I should— Mr. Harlan." She turned to face him, her hands already wet from the water. "I'm capable of washing dishes without supervision. Go do whatever it is you do in the evenings. I'll manage here." He should have been insulted. Instead, he found himself almost smiling. "You're direct. Life's too short for dancing around the point." She turned back to the dishes. "My husband used to say I was too blunt for polite society. He probably wasn't wrong." "I don't mind it." "Good, because I'm unlikely to change." Caleb left her to it and went back to his office. But this time the ledgers held his attention even less than before. He could hear her moving around in the kitchen, the splash of water, the clink of dishes being stacked to dry, the soft sound of humming. Humming. When was the last time there'd been humming in this house? He gave up on the ledgers entirely and went out to the porch to watch the sunset. The sky had gone deep orange and purple, streaked with red along the horizon. The prairie stretched out in all directions, grass silvered by the fading light. This was the time of day he usually felt it most. The loneliness. When the work was done and there was nothing left but empty rooms and silence. Tonight, the silence had sound in it. Dishes being washed, footsteps on the floorboards, small noises that meant someone else was alive and moving through his space. It didn't fix anything. Didn't heal the grief or fill the Catherine-shaped hole in his chest. But it was something. A beginning, maybe, or at least less of an ending. "Mr. Harlan?" Evelyn's voice came from the doorway behind him. He turned. She'd taken off her apron and put her hair up in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. The evening light touched the scarred side of her face, making the damaged skin look almost luminous. "I'm going up to bed," she said. "Is there anything you need before I do?" "No, thank you for supper." "You're welcome." She hesitated, her hand on the doorframe. "About tomorrow, church. Are you certain you want to do this?" "Are you?" I asked first. Caleb looked out at the darkening prairie, then back at her. People are going to talk no matter what we do. Might as well give them something to talk about that's actually true. She nodded slowly. Then I'll wear my veil. Make it easier. You don't have to. I know. Her voice was quiet but firm. But I will anyway. For you. Before he could respond, she was gone, her footsteps soft on the stairs. Caleb stayed on the porch until full dark, watching stars emerge one by one in the vast Montana sky. Tomorrow they'd go to town. Tomorrow everyone would see. Tomorrow the gossip would start in earnest. He should have been dreading it. Instead, all he felt was a strange, cautious curiosity about what the woman sleeping at the far end of his hall would do when faced with the cruelty he knew was coming. Something told him Evelyn Shaw wasn't the type to hide for long. Evelyn stood at her window in her nightgown, looking out at the prairie under starlight. The darkness out here was different than city darkness, absolute, complete, broken only by the distant lights of the ranch house below and the impossible number of stars overhead. She touched her reflection in the glass, watching her fingers trace the scarred side of her face. The fire had happened in a tenement in Philadelphia 4 years and a lifetime ago. Her husband Thomas had been a printer, working late to finish a rush job. She'd brought him dinner and stayed to help. The lamp had fallen, the papers had caught. By the time they'd escaped, Thomas was dead, and she was changed. The doctors had said she was lucky to be alive. Her mother-in-law had said God was punishing her for something, though she'd never specified what. The neighbors had said she should be grateful Thomas hadn't lived to see her like this. Everyone had opinions about her scars except her. She'd learned quickly that people fell into 3 categories: those who stared and couldn't stop, those who stared and pretended not to, and those who looked once and then met her eyes like a human being. Caleb Harlan had stared. But then he'd met her eyes. That was something. Evelyn turned from the window and climbed into bed. The sheets smelled like lye soap and sunshine, clean but impersonal. The mattress was firm, the quilt heavy enough for comfort. Everything adequate and nothing more. She'd expected nothing more. In Philadelphia, her room had been barely large enough for a bed and a trunk. The walls had been water-stained, and the window had looked out at a brick wall 3 feet away. She'd sewn for 12 hours a day to pay rent and buy food, her fingers cramping and her eyes burning from squinting in dim light. This room was a palace by comparison, and tomorrow she'd face the first real test. Church, public exposure. The moment when theory became reality and Caleb Harlan would have to choose whether to stand beside her or step away. Most men stepped away. Evelyn pulled the quilt up to her chin and stared at the ceiling, too keyed up to sleep despite her exhaustion. She'd made this choice deliberately, answered the advertisement knowing exactly what it meant. Traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger because the alternative was to keep slowly disappearing in Philadelphia until there was nothing left. She'd chosen this. Whatever happened tomorrow, she'd chosen it. The house settled around her with small creaks and sighs. Somewhere below, a board groaned under Caleb's weight as he moved through his evening routine. Normal sounds. Domestic sounds. The sounds of a shared space. Strange. Unsettling, and somehow not entirely unwelcome. Evelyn closed her eyes and tried to sleep, knowing tomorrow would come whether she was ready for it or not. Morning came too early, announced by roosters and the pale gray light that precedes sunrise. Evelyn woke to unfamiliar silence. No street vendors shouting, no wagons rattling past, no neighbors arguing through thin walls, just wind moving through grass and the distant sound of cattle lowing. She dressed carefully in her best black dress, the one she'd saved for occasions that required respectability. The fabric was heavy despite the summer heat, but she'd learned long ago that dark colors drew less attention than lighter ones. She pinned her hair back severely, then reached for her veil and stopped. Caleb had said she didn't have to wear it, but he'd also said people would be cruel. The veil went on. Downstairs, she found Caleb already in the kitchen, standing at the stove with a coffee pot in hand. He'd dressed for church, too. Dark suit, white shirt, string tie. His hair was combed back and still damp, probably from washing at the pump outside. He looked uncomfortable in the formal clothes, like a man wearing someone else's skin. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Coffee's almost ready." "Thank you." Evelyn moved to the pantry. I'll make breakfast. You don't have to. Mr. Harlan. She pulled out eggs and the bacon she'd found yesterday. We're going to church. We'll be gone for hours. We need to eat. That's not negotiation, that's practicality. He almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. They ate quickly. Fried eggs, bacon, toast with butter. Simple food, but filling. Caleb ate like a man who'd been making do with cold beans for too long, efficiently and without comment. Evelyn ate precisely, aware of the veil limiting her peripheral vision and not wanting to embarrass herself by missing her mouth. The wagon was waiting outside when they finished, hitched to two sturdy horses. Caleb helped her up to the bench seat with a hand under her elbow, his touch brief and impersonal. Then he climbed up beside her, gathered the reins, and clicked his tongue to the horses. They rolled toward town through the golden morning, wheels creaking, harness jingling. The prairie stretched endless on all sides, broken only by occasional fence lines and the dark shapes of cattle grazing in the distance. The sky was already heating up, promising another scorcher of a day. Church starts at 10, Caleb said after a long silence. Service usually runs about an hour. There's a social after. Food, conversation. We can stay or leave, whatever you prefer. We'll stay. Evelyn kept her hands folded in her lap, her posture perfect despite the bouncing wagon. Running away only makes things worse. You keep saying that like you have experience. I do. She watched a hawk circle overhead, riding thermals. After the fire, I tried hiding, stayed in my room for weeks. When I finally went out, people had built up so many stories about what I looked like that reality was almost disappointing. The mystery was worse than the truth. Caleb was quiet for a moment. What happened? The fire, I mean. You mentioned your husband died. Thomas was a printer, good man, patient, kind. The words came easier than she expected. We were working late on a job, political pamphlets, needed to be ready by morning. I brought him dinner, stayed to help. A lamp fell. She paused, feeling the ghost of heat on her skin. The papers caught first, then the curtains, then everything. Thomas pushed me toward the door, got me out, went back for the plates, the printing plates. They were expensive. We couldn't afford to replace them. The building collapsed before he made it back. Jesus. Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. God wasn't much involved, I don't think. Evelyn's voice stayed level. Bad luck, bad timing, bad decisions. I lived. Thomas didn't. The scars are just proof I was there. I'm sorry. So am I. She turned her head to look at him, her view limited by the veil's netting. Your wife. How did she die? His jaw worked for a moment. Influenza. 3 years ago this December. She was sick for a week. Doctor said she'd recover. She didn't. Were you married long? 5 years. He kept his eyes on the road. Met her in town. She was visiting her aunt. She was beautiful. Everyone wanted her. For some reason, she chose me. The way he said it, like he still couldn't believe it, like he was still waiting for someone to tell him it had been a mistake, made something twist in Evelyn's chest. You loved her. I thought so. Now I'm not sure I knew what love was supposed to be. Before Evelyn could respond, the town appeared on the horizon. A collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street, with a white church steeple rising above them all. Small town. Maybe 300 people. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where secrets were currency and gossip was sport. Evelyn's stomach tightened, but she kept her breathing steady. She'd survived worse than small-town judgment. They rolled down the main street past a general store, a saloon, a hotel, a livery stable. People were already gathering near the church, women in their Sunday bests, men in suits and clean shirts, children running between them in nervous energy. Heads turned as the wagon passed. Conversations stopped. Staring commenced. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop near the church and climbed down, then came around to help Evelyn. She accepted his hand and stepped down carefully, feeling dozens of eyes tracking her every movement. The veil hid her face but not her figure, and she could practically hear the calculations running through their minds. Tall enough, thin enough, dressed appropriately but not expensively, moving with careful dignity. Caleb! A woman's voice rang out, bright and false as brass. There you are. We were beginning to think you wouldn't come. The woman approaching was perhaps 50, dressed in a lavender dress that must have cost more than Evelyn's entire wardrobe. Her hair was elaborately curled beneath a fashionable hat, and her smile showed too many teeth. Behind her, two other women flanked her like soldiers. Mrs. Patterson? Caleb's voice went carefully neutral. Morning. And this must be your arrangement. Mrs. Patterson's eyes raked over Evelyn with undisguised curiosity. How lovely to finally meet you, dear. I'm Margaret Patterson. My husband owns the bank. This is Mrs. Wheeler and Mrs. Holbrook. The other women nodded, their smiles identical copies of Mrs. Patterson's. How do you do? Evelyn kept her voice polite but cool. We're all simply fascinated by your arrival, Mrs. Patterson continued, moving closer. A mail-order bride, how modern, how practical. And that veil, is it for mourning or... The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Sun sensitivity, Evelyn said calmly. The journey was difficult. My skin needs protection. How unfortunate. Mrs. Patterson's smile never wavered. Well, we're just delighted Caleb has finally moved on. After dear Catherine passed, such a tragedy, we've all been so worried about him, out there alone in that big house. It's good to see him taking practical steps toward companionship. The way she said companionship made it sound like something purchased from a catalog, which Evelyn supposed wasn't entirely inaccurate. Margaret, Caleb's voice carried a warning edge. We should head inside. Of course, of course! Mrs. Patterson stepped back, but her eyes never left Evelyn. We'll speak more at the social after. I'm simply dying to know all about you. She swept away toward the church, her entourage following. Other people were still watching, some openly, some pretending not to. An elderly couple near the church steps, a young mother with 3 children, a group of men by the livery passing a flask despite the hour. And standing apart from everyone, leaning against a fence post with his arms crossed, was a man Evelyn recognized even though they'd never met. Vance Crowley. Had to be. He was watching them with an expression that wasn't quite a smile, wasn't quite a sneer, something knowing and cruel that made her skin crawl. Ignore him, Caleb murmured, offering his arm. Hard to ignore a snake when you know it's there. But Evelyn took his arm anyway, her fingers light against his sleeve. They walked toward the church together, running the gauntlet of stares and whispers. Inside, the church was simple but well-maintained. Wooden pews, whitewashed walls, windows that let in bars of golden light. A piano in the corner, a pulpit at the front, the smell of beeswax and old hymn books. Caleb led them to a pew in the middle, not front, not back. A statement. They belonged here, but they weren't making a show of it. People filed in around them, the whispers never quite stopping. Evelyn sat straight-backed and still, her hands folded in her lap, her veil firmly in place. The service began. Hymns she didn't know, sung to melodies she recognized. A sermon about charity and judgment, which felt pointed given the circumstances. Evelyn barely heard any of it. She was too aware of the stares drilling into her back, too conscious of Caleb sitting rigid beside her, too focused on keeping her breathing steady and her composure intact. When it finally ended, she wanted nothing more than to escape to the wagon and leave. But Caleb had been right. Running would only make it worse. The social was held in the churchyard, with tables set up in the shade of cottonwood trees. Women laid out food they'd brought, pies, casseroles, fried chicken, fresh bread. Children ran and shouted. Men gathered in groups to talk about crops and cattle and weather. Normal Sunday activities, except for the constant undercurrent of attention focused on Evelyn and Caleb. Mrs. Patterson materialized beside them with a plate of cookies. You simply must try these, dear. My special recipe. Thank you, but I'm not hungry. Evelyn kept her voice polite. Nonsense. You're thin as a rail. Caleb, make sure she eats. You don't want her wasting away. Mrs. Patterson's laugh was like breaking glass. Now, dear, you must tell us, where did you come from? Philadelphia, wasn't it? What brought you all the way out here to our little town? Opportunity. Evelyn chose the word carefully. Opportunity. How charmingly vague. Mrs. Patterson leaned in, lowering her voice to a stage whisper. You can tell us, dear. Was it scandal? Debt? We all have our little secrets. Margaret. Another woman appeared, older, gray-haired, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense expression. Stop interrogating the poor girl. I'm Helen Morrison, dear. Welcome to Promise Creek. I hope Margaret hasn't frightened you off already. Not at all. Evelyn felt something ease slightly in her chest. Thank you for the welcome. Don't mention it. And don't mind Margaret. She means well. She just has the subtlety of a bull in a china shop. Helen shot Mrs. Patterson a look that could have curdled milk. Now, if you'll excuse us, Margaret, I'd like to introduce Mrs. Harlan to some of the other ladies who won't treat her like a carnival exhibit. Mrs. Patterson's smile went brittle. Of course, we'll speak later. She drifted away, already collecting her entourage. Helen watched her go with narrowed eyes. That woman is a menace. Come on, let me introduce you to some actual human beings. For the next hour, Helen guided Evelyn through the social with the skill of an experienced general. She introduced her to Sarah Chen, who ran the general store with her husband, and greeted Evelyn with a simple nod and no questions. To Emma Rodriguez, a rancher's wife with calloused hands and a warm smile, who told Evelyn she'd made it through 3 Montana winters, and if she needed advice on survival, Emma was her woman. To Father Callahan, the Catholic priest who served the area's few Catholic families, and who shook Evelyn's hand with genuine kindness. Not everyone was cruel. Not everyone stared with judgment or pity. Some people just were. They treated her like a person, asked normal questions about settling in and whether she needed anything, and didn't press when she kept her answers brief. It helped, more than Evelyn had expected. But then Vance Crowley approached, and the entire temperature of the gathering dropped 10 degrees. Caleb. Vance's voice carried that same knowing edge from earlier. Finally bringing your purchase out for inspection? Caleb's entire body went rigid. Walk away, Vance. Just making conversation. Vance turned his attention to Evelyn, looking her up and down with deliberate slowness. That's quite the veil, ma'am. What are you hiding under there? Scars? Poxmarks? Just so ugly you'd scare the horses? Vance. Caleb stepped forward, his hands fisting. It's fine. Evelyn kept her voice level, though her heart was hammering. She'd dealt with men like this before, men who found sport in cruelty, who measured their worth by how much pain they could cause others. Showing fear only encouraged them. Is it? Vance grinned. Come on, let's see what Caleb bought himself. He paid for you, didn't he? Got a right to know what he's getting. I said walk away. Caleb's voice had gone dangerously quiet. Or what? You'll fight me in the churchyard? Vance laughed. Over damaged goods? Several things happened at once. Caleb lunged forward, his fist already swinging. Helen Morrison moved faster, stepping between them with the authority of a woman who'd raised 6 boys. That's enough, both of you. Evelyn reached up and unpinned her veil. The yard went silent. She folded the veil carefully and met Vance's eyes. There. Take a good look. Get it out of your system. Vance's grin faltered. He'd expected her to cry, maybe, to hide, to give him the satisfaction of her fear. Instead, she stood there, chin up, scarred face fully visible in the bright summer sun, and looked at him like he was something she'd scraped off her shoe. Well? Her voice carried across the yard. Satisfied? Or do you need me to turn around so you can inspect all sides? Several people laughed. Not cruel laughter, but the nervous kind that comes when someone's been made to look foolish. Vance's face went red. Freak, he spat. Yes, Evelyn agreed calmly. I am. Anything else you'd like to add? Because if that's the best you've got, I'm deeply disappointed. I've heard far more creative insults from children. Helen Morrison made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Sarah Chen's smile was sharp as a knife. Even Father Callahan looked like he was fighting to keep a straight face. Vance looked around, realized he'd lost his audience, and stalked away muttering. Caleb was staring at Evelyn with something like awe. You didn't have to. Yes, I did. Evelyn turned to face him, still holding her veil. If I'd hidden, he'd have won. Now everyone's seen. Now they can decide for themselves instead of letting imagination run wild. But Mr. Harlan, she softened her voice slightly. I've been doing this for 4 years. I know how it works. You can't control what people think, but you can control whether they control you. Helen Morrison patted Evelyn's shoulder. You'll do just fine here, dear. Just fine. Now, let's get you some lemonade. You've earned it. The social continued, but the dynamic had shifted. Some people still stared, but the open cruelty had been diffused. Mrs. Patterson tried to approach again, but seemed to think better of it when Evelyn met her eyes steadily. A few women even smiled, tentative, testing, but genuine. It wasn't acceptance. Not yet. But it was a start. When they finally climbed back into the wagon to head home, the sun was high and hot, and Evelyn felt wrung out like a dish rag. She kept the veil off, folded in her lap. If she was going to do this, truly do this, she might as well start as she meant to continue. That was, Caleb started, then stopped. I don't even know what to call it. Necessary, Evelyn supplied. You stood up to Vance like it was nothing. It wasn't nothing, it was terrifying. She looked out at the passing prairie. But fear only wins if you let it. Thomas taught me that. After the fire, I wanted to hide forever. He told me the only way through was forward, even when forward hurt. Smart man. He had his moments, she paused. You were about to punch Vance. He called you damaged goods. I am damaged goods. She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. That's not an insult, that's an observation. The insult was implying you made a bad purchase, which suggests he thinks of women as merchandise. Still wanted to punch him. I noticed. Something warm flickered in her chest, surprising her. Thank you for wanting to defend me, even if it wasn't necessary. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of wheels and the jingle of harness. Then Caleb spoke again, his voice careful. You're braver than I am. Evelyn looked at him, at his profile against the endless sky. Strong jaw, straight nose, eyes that held more sadness than any man his age should carry. You let a stranger into your home, agreed to marry her sight unseen, stood beside her in front of your entire town. That's brave too. That's just practical. Bravery usually is. They reached the ranch in early afternoon. Caleb unhitched the horses while Evelyn went inside and changed out of her church dress into work clothes. The house was hot from sitting closed up all morning, so she opened windows to catch whatever breeze existed. Then she went to the kitchen and stared at it with the clinical eye of someone about to reorganize. By the time Caleb came inside, she'd already started pulling things out of cabinets. What are you doing? He stood in the doorway looking alarmed. Fixing your spice shelf. I warned you this morning. It's offensive. She set a jar of cinnamon next to one of salt. These need to be grouped logically. Baking spices together, cooking spices together, salt and pepper accessible, basic organization. I liked it the way it was. You liked chaos. There's a difference. She didn't look up from her sorting. You can watch if you want, but you're not stopping me. He watched for a few minutes, then shook his head and disappeared toward his office. Evelyn smiled to herself and continued working. By evening, the kitchen had been transformed. Spices organized, pantry shelves rearranged so the most used items were at eye level, pots and pans sorted by size. The whole space felt more efficient, more logical, more like a place where cooking could actually happen without frustration. She made dinner, roasted chicken with vegetables from the root cellar, biscuits, gravy, real food that required real cooking. When she called Caleb to the table, he came out of his office looking tired and slightly defeated. I tried working on the books, he said. Numbers aren't making sense. After dinner, I'll look at them if you want. Evelyn served the chicken. I manage Thomas's accounts. I'm decent with figures. You don't have to. Mr. Harlan. She met his eyes across the table. I'm going to keep saying this until you hear it. I'm not here to be decorative. I'm here to be useful. If I can help, I will. That's the arrangement. He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. Thank you. They ate while the sun set beyond the windows, painting the prairie in shades of rose and amber. The house felt different than it had the night before. Less empty, somehow. Less haunted. Like it was starting to remember what it felt like to be lived in. After dinner, Evelyn did look at the books. She sat at Caleb's desk while he stood behind her, pointing out entries that confused him. It took about 15 minutes to spot the problem. He'd been recording cattle sales in the wrong column, making it look like he'd lost money when he'd actually made a decent profit. There, she showed him the corrected figures. You're not broke, you're just terrible at bookkeeping. He laughed, actually laughed, a rusty sound like he'd forgotten how. Catherine used to manage this stuff. After she died, I just tried to muddle through. Well, stop muddling. Let me handle it. I'll have these organized properly by the end of the week. You're going to reorganize my entire life, aren't you? Only the parts that need it. She stood and moved toward the door, which appears to be most of them. Evelyn. She stopped, turned. He'd used her first name. That was new. Thank you, he said quietly. For today, for church, for standing up to Vance, for all of it. You didn't have to, but you did. I did it for me as much as for you, she said honestly. I'm tired of hiding, tired of letting fear make my decisions. If this arrangement is going to work, we both need to stop being afraid. What if I don't know how? Then we'll figure it out together. She managed a small smile. 2 weeks, remember? We've got time. She left him standing in his office and climbed the stairs to her room. Through the window, stars were already emerging in the darkening sky. So many they looked like scattered diamonds. The prairie breathed beneath them, vast and patient and indifferent to human drama. Evelyn changed into her nightgown and sat at the window, looking out at all that darkness and possibility. Today had been hard. Tomorrow would probably be hard too. But she'd survived. They'd both survived. And survival, she was learning, was its own kind of victory. The days that followed settled into a rhythm neither of them had anticipated. Evelyn rose before dawn to start coffee and breakfast. Caleb came down to find hot food waiting and his kitchen transformed incrementally. New curtains she'd sewn from fabric she found in a trunk, shelves organized with ruthless efficiency, a jar of wildflowers on the table that she'd gathered from the prairie during her afternoon walks. Small changes that accumulated into something larger, something that felt dangerously close to home. By the end of the first week, they'd signed the marriage license. Caleb had laid it on the kitchen table after supper on Friday night, his hand not quite steady as he uncapped the ink bottle. Evelyn had read through it one more time, her finger tracing each clause, each promise, each binding word. Then she'd picked up the pen. "You're sure?" Caleb had asked. She'd looked at him across the table, this man who'd kept his word even when it cost him, who ate her cooking like it was a revelation, who'd stood beside her in church and hadn't flinched when Vance Crowley had hurled his poison. "Are you?" I asked first. Then yes, I'm sure. They'd signed together, his signature bold and sprawling, hers precise and controlled. Legal now. Binding. Mr. and Mrs. Caleb Harlan, for better or worse, with 2 weeks to decide if worse was bearable. The town had reacted to the news with predictable gossip. Mrs. Patterson had made pointed comments about unseemly haste. Vance Crowley had laughed outright when he'd heard, his voice carrying across the general store. But others had surprised them. Helen Morrison had brought over a basket of preserves and welcomed Evelyn to the club of women who've survived Montana winters. Sarah Chen had offered a discount on any fabric Evelyn needed for making the house more comfortable. And Emma Rodriguez had stopped by the ranch with fresh eggs and an invitation to visit her spread anytime Evelyn needed to talk to someone who understood what it meant to be an outsider. The kindness had caught Evelyn off guard. She'd braced for judgment and found humanity instead, at least from some corners. It didn't erase the cruelty. Mrs. Patterson's false concern, the way certain women pulled their children away when Evelyn passed, the comments she pretended not to hear about charity cases and desperate men, but it balanced it enough to be bearable. What she hadn't anticipated was how the house itself would change, how opening windows would let in not just air but sound, birdsong in the morning, cicadas in the evening, the distant bellow of cattle. How cooking for two would feel different than cooking for one, more purposeful somehow. How sharing space with another person would create small negotiations and compromises that slowly built something like partnership. Caleb had stopped hovering. He'd learned that Evelyn meant what she said about being useful, that she didn't need protection or supervision. He'd come in from the fields covered in dust and sweat to find dinner ready, the books balanced, his shirts mended. He'd started trusting her with ranch business, asking her opinion on which cattle to sell, whether to repair or replace the barn roof, how to handle a dispute with a neighboring rancher over water rights. And Evelyn had stopped treating the house like a temporary shelter. She'd unpacked everything from her trunks, arranged her books on a shelf in the parlor, hung her mother's brush on the wall where she could see it, small declarations that she was staying, at least for now, that this place, this arrangement, was becoming something more than survival. They were 2 weeks into the marriage, sitting on the porch after supper watching the sun sink toward the horizon when the storm rolled in. Not a rainstorm, a dust storm, the kind that turned the sky yellow-brown and made breathing difficult. Caleb saw it coming and moved fast, calling Evelyn inside and shutting every window and door in the house. They stuffed rags under door frames to keep the dust out, while outside the wind howled and threw dirt against the walls like thrown sand. The storm lasted 3 hours. They waited it out in the parlor with lamps lit against the unnatural darkness, sitting in chairs across from each other with nothing to do but talk or not talk. Silence felt wrong somehow, too heavy for the moment. So Caleb started asking questions, casual things at first, safe topics about her life in Philadelphia, what she'd sown, what she'd read. She answered carefully, offering facts without feeling, until he asked about Thomas. What was he like? Your husband. Evelyn had looked up from the sock she was darning, one of Caleb's, with a hole in the heel big enough to lose a toe through. Why do you want to know? Because you loved him, and I want to understand what that looked like. The honesty in his voice had surprised her. She'd set down the sock and considered how to explain Thomas to someone who'd never met him. He was kind, patient, the kind of man who noticed when you were tired and would take over whatever you were doing without making it feel like pity. He laughed easily, read constantly, believed people were fundamentally good even when they proved him wrong. Sounds like a saint. He wasn't. She'd smiled slightly. He was terrible with money. Couldn't say no to anyone who asked for help, which meant we were always broke. He'd get so absorbed in his work, he'd forget to eat for an entire day. And he snored like a sawmill. Caleb had laughed at that, and the sound had done something strange to her chest. Catherine was beautiful, he'd said after a moment. Everyone said so. Perfect manners, perfect posture, perfect everything. My mother said I'd married above my station. Did you believe her? Every single day. He'd stared at the lamp flame, his face shadowed. Catherine was... She tried. I'll give her that. She tried to be a rancher's wife, tried to adapt to this life. But she hated it. Hated the isolation, the dirt, the endless work. She wanted to live in town, have parties, be around people. I kept thinking she'd adjust, that she'd learn to love this place the way I do. She never did. That must have been lonely. It was. He'd met her eyes then. For both of us, I think. She was lonely for the life she'd left behind. I was lonely because the woman I'd married didn't want the life I'd built. Did you talk about it? No. I thought if I just worked harder, made more money, built a nicer house, she'd be happy. So I worked myself half to death trying to give her everything she wanted, and all she wanted was to leave. The rawness in his voice had made Evelyn's throat tight. I'm sorry. Don't be. It wasn't her fault any more than it was mine. We just wanted different things. And then she died before we could figure out if there was any way to bridge that gap. He'd paused. The worst part? When she got sick, part of me was relieved. Not that she was dying. I'd never wished that. But relieved that the pretending would finally end. What kind of man thinks that about his dying wife? An honest one. Evelyn had picked up the sock again, needing something to do with her hands. Thomas and I had our problems too. He wanted children. I couldn't have them, something the doctor said after a miscarriage 2 years into our marriage. Thomas said it didn't matter, that he loved me regardless. But I could see it in his eyes sometimes, the disappointment, the wondering about what might have been. Did he blame you? No, but I blame myself enough for both of us. She'd pulled the thread through fabric, watching it disappear and reappear. After he died, there was this tiny, terrible part of me that was almost glad, because at least he couldn't be disappointed in me anymore. They'd sat with that confession between them, the weight of it shared rather than borne alone. Outside, the wind had continued its assault on the house, but inside it felt oddly peaceful. two people who'd failed at love once, trying to figure out if they could manage something resembling it a second time. "We're quite a pair," Caleb had said finally. "Yes, we are." The storm had passed near midnight. They'd emerged to find the porch buried in dust, the air still thick with it, everything coated in a fine layer of grit that would take days to fully clean. But they'd cleaned it together, working side by side with rags and brooms and buckets of water from the pump, and somehow that felt significant. A small declaration that they were partners in this, whatever this was becoming. The days grew longer and hotter as June turned toward July. The prairie turned golden, then brown, grass drying in the relentless sun. Caleb worked from dawn until dark, haying and mending fence and moving cattle to better pasture. He came home exhausted, barely able to eat before falling into bed. Evelyn worked just as hard inside, canning vegetables from the garden she'd discovered behind the house, cleaning rooms that hadn't been properly cleaned in 3 years, sewing curtains and mending clothes and baking bread in the sweltering kitchen. They were building something. Neither of them said it out loud, but they both felt it. The way the house was becoming theirs rather than his, the way conversation flowed easier over dinner, the way they developed small habits and rhythms that required no discussion. Caleb would leave his boots by the door without being asked because Evelyn liked clean floors. Evelyn would have coffee ready when he came down in the morning because she'd learned he was useless until he'd had at least 2 cups. Small accommodations that added up to something larger than courtesy. But there were complications too. Things neither of them had anticipated in the practical letters they'd exchanged, in the careful terms of their arrangement. Physical awareness that crept in uninvited during unguarded moments. The way Evelyn noticed the strength in Caleb's forearms when he rolled up his sleeves, the broad span of his shoulders, the rare smile that transformed his whole face. The way Caleb found himself watching Evelyn move through the house with unconscious grace, the curve of her neck when she pinned up her hair, the surprisingly musical sound of her laughter when something genuinely amused her. It was the laughter that undid him first. They'd been playing cards one evening after supper, a simple game she'd taught him, nothing complicated. He'd made a strategic error so obvious it was comical, and she'd laughed, really laughed, head thrown back, eyes bright, the sound spilling out of her without restraint. He'd stared at her, completely transfixed, and she'd caught him staring. The laughter had stopped. The air between them had gone electric. "Caleb?" Her voice had been uncertain. He'd stood up so fast his chair had scraped across the floor. I need to check on the horses. It's 10 o'clock at night. I'll be back." He'd fled to the barn like a coward and spent an hour sitting in the hay trying to unknot the tangle of feelings in his chest. This wasn't the arrangement. This wasn't the safe, practical partnership he'd signed up for. This was dangerous territory. Wanting someone, being attracted to someone, risking actual emotion rather than just going through the motions. He'd thought he was done with that. Thought the part of him that could feel that way had died with Catherine. Finding out he was wrong should have been a relief. Instead, it terrified him. Because Evelyn was temporary. She could still leave, could still decide this wasn't working and take the stage back to Philadelphia or anywhere else that wasn't here. The 2-week trial period had passed, yes, but divorce was possible if both parties agreed. And he'd already lost one wife to this place, to his inability to be what she needed. He couldn't survive losing another. Better to keep the distance, keep the boundaries, keep it safe. When he'd finally gone back inside, Evelyn had been in the kitchen cleaning up from their card game. She'd looked at him with those dark, knowing eyes and said nothing. Just nodded goodnight and climbed the stairs to her room, leaving him alone with his cowardice. The distance had held for almost a week. They'd been polite, careful, treating each other with the kind of formal courtesy that felt like glass. Smooth on the surface, but ready to shatter at the slightest pressure. Evelyn had thrown herself into work with fierce intensity, scrubbing floors that were already clean, reorganizing cabinets that were already organized. Caleb had found reasons to stay in the fields until dark, to take his dinner cold rather than sit across from her at the table. Then came the day he'd been working on the barn roof, replacing shingles damaged in the dust storm. The heat had been brutal, the sun beating down with relentless intensity. He'd been up there for hours when he'd made the mistake of standing up too fast, dizzy from heat and exertion. His boot had slipped on the pitch, and he'd fallen, sliding down the slope and catching himself just before the edge. But not before he'd wrenched his shoulder badly enough to make his vision go white with pain. He'd managed to climb down the ladder one-handed, teeth gritted against the agony, and had stumbled toward the house intending to just lie down for a minute. He'd made it as far as the kitchen before his legs had given out. Evelyn had caught him. Somehow she'd been there, her arms around his chest, taking his weight despite being half his size. She'd gotten him to a chair, her hands surprisingly strong, her voice cutting through the pain fog with questions. What happened? Where does it hurt? Can you move it? Should she ride for the doctor? No doctor. He'd managed to get the words out. Just need to rest it. The hell you do. Let me see. She'd unbuttoned his shirt with brisk efficiency, professional rather than intimate, and he'd been too hurt to protest. When she'd pulled the fabric back from his shoulder, she'd hissed through her teeth. It's already swelling. You might have dislocated it. Just pulled something. Caleb Harlan, you're the worst patient I've ever seen, and I haven't even started treating you yet. But her hands had been gentle as she'd felt along his shoulder, testing the joint, making him move his arm in small increments to check the range of motion. Not dislocated, thank God. But you've definitely strained something. You need ice and rest. Don't have ice. Then cold water will have to do. She disappeared into the mudroom and returned with cloths soaked in well water, cool against his overheated skin. She'd fashioned a makeshift sling from a kitchen towel and made him sit still while she brought him water and food he couldn't eat because his stomach was churning from pain. She'd stayed with him all afternoon, replacing the cold compresses, checking his temperature to make sure heat exhaustion wasn't setting in, talking to him about nothing in particular to keep him awake and alert. At some point, he'd dozed off in the chair, too exhausted and hurt to make it upstairs. When he'd woken, it was dark outside and Evelyn was asleep in the chair across from him, her head tilted at an angle that would make her neck hurt, her hand still resting on the table between them as if she'd been holding his before she'd drifted off. He'd sat there in the dim lamplight, watching her sleep, and felt something crack open in his chest. This woman who owed him nothing, who'd married him out of necessity rather than affection, who could have left him to manage his injury alone and no one would have blamed her, she'd stayed. She'd taken care of him with the same fierce competence she brought to everything, asking nothing in return. And he'd been avoiding her for a week because he was afraid of wanting her. What a goddamn fool he was. Evelyn. His voice came out rough. She'd woken immediately, sitting up straight, her eyes going to his shoulder. How do you feel? Is it worse? Do you need more water? I'm sorry. That stopped her. For what? For running away. After the card game, for being a coward all week. He'd met her eyes, forcing himself to be honest, even though honesty felt like standing naked in a windstorm. You laughed, and I realized I wanted to make you laugh again. Wanted to be the reason for it. And that scared me more than anything has scared me in a long time. She'd gone very still. Why did it scare you? Because this was supposed to be safe, practical. No feelings, no risk, no chance of failing again. And then you moved in and reorganized my spice shelf and stood up to Vance Crowley and made my house feel like a home, and suddenly nothing about this feels safe anymore. Caleb, I know this isn't what you signed up for. He'd pushed forward, needing to say it all before he lost his nerve. I know we agreed to boundaries and respect and no expectations. I'm not asking you to change the terms. I needed you to know that I see you, all of you, not just the arrangement, and that scares me, but it's also the most alive I've felt in 3 years. The silence that followed had been crushing. Evelyn had stared at him with an expression he couldn't read, her scarred face shadowed in the lamplight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice had been barely above a whisper. You think you're the only one who's scared? I don't. Every morning I wake up in this house, I'm terrified. Terrified you'll realize what everyone else sees, that I'm damaged, difficult, too scarred inside and out to be worth the effort. Terrified that I'll start to care about this place, about this life, about you, and then lose it all when you decide I'm not enough. Her hands had twisted in her lap. I've been hiding behind practicality and efficiency because that's safe. Because if I'm just useful, just filling a role, then it doesn't hurt as much when it ends. Evelyn, but then you fell off that damn roof and I thought. Her voice cracked. I thought you might be seriously hurt, and I realized I wasn't scared of losing the arrangement. I was scared of losing you. Which is ridiculous because we barely know each other, and this is supposed to be practical, and I'm not supposed to care this much about someone I married for security. She'd looked up at him then, and the vulnerability in her eyes had stolen his breath. This strong, fierce woman who faced down bullies and reorganized chaos and never showed weakness. She was showing it now, offering it to him like a gift he didn't deserve. He'd reached across the table with his good arm, moving slowly so she could pull away if she wanted. She didn't pull away. Her fingers had met his halfway, curling around his hand with a grip that was almost desperate. I don't know how to do this, he'd said quietly. How to be more than just existing in the same space. Catherine and I, we never figured it out. I don't want to fail at this too. I don't know how either. Her thumb had brushed across his knuckles. Thomas and I were good at being married, but we were never good at being honest. We pretended everything was fine until he died and left me drowning in all the things we'd never said. So what do? Maybe we start by not running away when things get difficult, not hiding when we're scared. She'd managed a small smile. And maybe we accept that we're both probably going to be terrible at this, but we're terrible at it together. He'd smiled back, and for the first time in a week, the tension in his chest had eased. Together. I can do together. They'd sat like that for a long time, hands clasped across the kitchen table, neither of them quite ready to let go. Outside, the prairie night hummed with cicadas and distant coyotes. Inside, something fragile and precious was taking root between them. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The beginning of something real. When Evelyn had finally insisted he needed to get to bed before his shoulder got any worse, she'd helped him up the stairs with her arm around his waist, supporting his weight with surprising strength. At his bedroom door, she'd hesitated. Do you need help getting into bed? I can manage. He'd paused, not wanting her to go, but not knowing how to ask her to stay. Evelyn? Thank you, for today. For everything. She'd reached up and touched his face with gentle fingers, the gesture so unexpected it had frozen him in place. Get some rest, Caleb. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. Then she'd gone to her own room, leaving him standing in his doorway with the ghost of her touch on his cheek and hope doing dangerous things to his heart. The next morning, Caleb woke to find his shoulder still aching but manageable, and the smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs. He dressed one-handed with clumsy difficulty, his body protesting every movement, and made his way down to find Evelyn already at the stove. She turned when she heard his footsteps, her eyes going immediately to his shoulder. How does it feel? Like I fell off a roof. He attempted a smile. But better than last night. Sit. I'll bring you breakfast. She gestured to the table with a wooden spoon. And before you argue, you're not doing any work today. Doctor's orders. You're not a doctor. No, but I'm the person who's going to make your life miserable if you tear that shoulder worse by being stubborn. She set a plate in front of him. Eggs, bacon, biscuits with gravy. Eat. Then we're going to talk about what you can and can't do until that heals. They ate in surprisingly comfortable silence, the awkwardness from the night before replaced by something steadier. When they'd finished, Evelyn poured them both more coffee and sat across from him with the air of someone about to deliver difficult news. I've been thinking, she said carefully. That sounds dangerous. Probably. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Last night, we said we'd stop running away from difficult things. Stop hiding. So I need to say something that's been bothering me, and I need you to listen without getting defensive. Caleb set down his coffee cup, suddenly wary. All right. The town talks about me. About us. I know that. I expected it. She traced the rim of her cup with one finger. But what bothers me isn't the gossip itself. It's that you never respond to it. When Vance called me damaged goods, you were ready to punch him. But when Mrs. Patterson implies our marriage is charity, or when people whisper that you settled for less, you say nothing. You just accept it. The observation landed like a blow. I'm trying to protect you. By confirming what they think? Her voice stayed level, but her eyes were intense. Your silence makes it seem like they're right. Like you do regret this. Like I am just something you're tolerating. That's not... He stopped, forced himself to breathe. I don't know how to defend this. Us. I don't know what to say that won't make it worse. You could start by telling the truth. She leaned forward. Do you regret marrying me? The question hung between them, simple and terrible. Caleb looked at this woman who'd reorganized his life as efficiently as she'd reorganized his kitchen, who'd stood unflinching in front of his entire town, who'd held his hand across the table and offered him honesty even when it hurt. The answer should have been easy. It should have been. I don't regret it, he said finally, but I don't know how to explain it to people who think I should. Then don't explain it to them. Explain it to me. Her jaw set in that stubborn line he was learning to recognize. Because right now, when you stay silent while they talk about charity and pity and settling, what I hear is that maybe you agree with them. Maybe you do think you settled. I don't prove it. The challenge in her voice was sharp. Not to them, to me. Stop treating this marriage like something you're enduring and start treating it like something you chose. Before Caleb could respond, hoofbeats sounded outside. They both turned toward the window to see Vance Crowley dismounting in the yard, his horse lathered from a hard ride. Caleb stood, his good hand automatically going to where his gun belt would be if he wore one in the house. Stay inside, he told Evelyn. Like hell. She was already moving toward the door. This is my home too. They reached the porch together. Vance was halfway to the steps, his expression somewhere between smug and calculating. He stopped when he saw them both, his eyes flicking between them with obvious interest. Morning, Caleb. Mrs. Harlan. He tipped his hat mockingly at Evelyn. Heard you took a tumble yesterday. Came by to see if you needed any help with the ranch work while you're laid up. I'm fine. Caleb kept his voice flat. Don't need help. You sure about that? Man with a bad shoulder, all this land to manage, all these responsibilities? Vance's smile didn't reach his eyes. Seems like a lot for someone in your condition. Of course, I'd be happy to take some of that burden off your hands. Maybe buy some of your acreage, help you consolidate, make things more manageable. I'm not selling. Not yet, maybe. But you might change your mind. Vance's attention shifted to Evelyn. No offense, ma'am, but running a ranch takes two able bodies. You seem capable enough in a kitchen, but out here, in the fields, that's different work. Is it? Evelyn's voice was dangerously mild. I hadn't noticed. The fence I mended yesterday seemed to stay up just fine. Caleb's head whipped toward her. You mended fence? Someone had to. You were barely conscious. She didn't look away from Vance. And before you say it was too much for a woman, I'll remind you that I spent 4 years in Philadelphia carrying fabric bolts that weighed more than most of your fence posts. I'm stronger than I look. Vance's expression soured. I'm just saying, a man in Caleb's position might want to consider his options. This arrangement you two have, it's unconventional. People talk. Some might say he'd be better off with someone more suitable. Someone like who? Evelyn took a step forward. Her scarred face lifted to catch the morning light. Someone pretty enough that you wouldn't have to look away? Someone who'd keep quiet and not challenge you when you say cruel things? Is that what suitable means? I'm just looking out for my neighbor. You're looking out for yourself. Her voice cut like a blade. You want this land because it borders yours. You want Caleb to fail because his success makes your mediocrity obvious. And you want me gone because I don't fit whatever fantasy you have about what women should be. She crossed her arms. Well, I'm not going anywhere. So you can either accept that and be a decent neighbor, or you can keep making an ass of yourself. Your choice. Vance's face went red. He looked to Caleb, clearly expecting him to rein in his wife. Caleb felt the moment crystallize. The choice Evelyn had challenged him with earlier made manifest. He could smooth things over, apologize for her directness, maintain the peace, or he could stand beside her and mean it. You heard her, Caleb said quietly. We're not selling. We don't need your help. And if you've got nothing else to say, I've got work to do. With one good arm? Vance's laugh was harsh. Good luck with that. He's got two good arms, Evelyn said. His and mine. Now get off our property. For a moment, Vance looked like he might argue. Then he spat in the dirt, climbed back on his horse, and rode off without another word. They watched him go, dust rising in his wake, until he was just a speck against the horizon. Caleb turned to Evelyn. You mended fence? 3 sections near the creek. The posts were rotting and the wire was loose. She met his eyes steadily. I told you I wasn't here to be decorative. I know, but fence mending? Is there a rule that says women can't use a hammer? She started back toward the house. Thomas taught me basic carpentry, said it was practical knowledge. Turns out he was right. Caleb followed her inside, his mind reeling. You didn't have to do that. Stand up to Vance like that. Yes, I did. She moved to the kitchen and started clearing the breakfast dishes. He came here thinking he could intimidate us, thinking your injury made us vulnerable. If I'd stayed quiet, he would have taken it as confirmation that we're weak, that this marriage is a liability. But you weren't supposed to. I should have. Caleb struggled for words. I should have defended you better. You stood beside me. You didn't apologize for me or contradict me or try to smooth things over. She turned to face him. That's all I needed. Not a grand speech, just you choosing not to step away. The simple truth of it hit him hard. All this time he'd thought defending her meant fighting her battles. But what she actually needed was a partner who wouldn't abandon her in the middle of them. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for this morning, for not having a better answer when you asked if I regretted marrying you. Do you? Regret it? She asked again, softer this time. No. The word came easier now. But I'm terrified of screwing this up, of being the reason you leave, the same way I was probably the reason Catherine was so miserable. I don't know how to be good at this. Neither do I. She dried her hands on a towel. But I know that silence doesn't protect either of us. It just leaves space for other people to fill with their assumptions. She paused. I need to know that when things get hard, and they will get harder, you won't just go quiet. That you'll fight with me instead of retreating into yourself. I can try. He moved closer, drawn by something he didn't fully understand. I want to try. Then try. She held his gaze. Starting now, tell me something true, something you haven't said. Caleb's throat went tight. He'd spent 3 years not saying true things, keeping everything locked behind careful walls. Opening those walls felt like stepping off a cliff. But Evelyn had asked, and she deserved honesty. When you touched my face last night, he said slowly, I wanted to pull you into my room and ask you to stay. Not for anything improper, just to not be alone. Because being alone in that house with you down the hall feels worse than being alone when the house was actually empty. Her expression softened. Why didn't you? Because that's not the arrangement, because I didn't want to push, because I'm trying to be respectful of the boundaries we set. He took a breath. But the truth is, those boundaries are killing me, and I don't know how to ask if they're killing you too without sounding like I'm pressuring you into something you don't want. What if I do want it? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Not the physical part necessarily, though I'm not opposed, but the rest. The not being alone, the knowing someone's close, the feeling like maybe we're building something that matters. Then we'd be in the same boat. His good hand moved of its own accord, reaching for hers. Scared, and wanting things we didn't plan for and not knowing what the hell we're doing. Her fingers laced through his, warm and solid. I can work with scared. Scared means you care about the outcome. They stood like that in the kitchen, holding hands while sunlight streamed through the windows and dust motes danced in the air. It should have been awkward, 2 people married by contract, trying to navigate the gap between arrangement and something realer. Instead, it felt right, like pieces settling into place. The moment broke when someone knocked at the door. Evelyn pulled away with obvious reluctance. I'll get it. She returned a moment later with Helen Morrison, who was carrying a basket and wearing an expression of determined concern. Heard about your fall, Caleb. Brought soup and bread, figured you might need easy meals while you're healing. That's kind of you, Helen. Caleb gestured her toward the table. Coffee? Please. Helen set down her basket and studied them both with shrewd eyes. You two look like you've been through something. Everything all right? Vance Crowley stopped by, Evelyn said, moving to pour coffee. That vulture. Helen's mouth pressed into a thin line. Let me guess. Offered to buy land while you're vulnerable? And implied we weren't capable of managing the ranch. Evelyn set a cup in front of Helen. We sent him away. Good. Man's been circling this property like a buzzard since Catherine passed. Caleb's been too grief-stricken to notice, but some of us have been watching. Helen wrapped her hands around the cup. You've got friends in town, you know, more than you probably realize. Mrs. Patterson's crowd talks the loudest, but they're not the majority. Could have fooled me, Caleb muttered, because you stopped coming to town except for church. Helen looked at him over her coffee. After Catherine died, you retreated. Can't blame you for it, but it meant people filled in the gaps with assumptions. They decided you were grief-stricken and helpless. Decided this ranch was failing. Vance has been spreading those rumors for months. Why? Evelyn sat down at the table. What does he gain? Your land borders his on 3 sides. If he owned it, he'd have control of the whole valley, including the best water access for 20 miles. Helen took a sip of coffee. He's been trying to buy Caleb out for years. Catherine's death just gave him a new angle. Caleb felt cold. You're saying he's been actively working to undermine me? I'm saying he's been patient, waiting for you to fall apart completely so he could swoop in with a generous offer. Helen's smile was grim. Your marriage threw a wrench in his plans. He thought you'd stay helpless and alone. Instead, you got yourself a capable wife who doesn't take his nonsense. How do you know all this? Evelyn asked. Because I'm old, invisible, and nosy. People talk in front of me like I'm furniture. I hear things. Helen leaned forward. Vance has been meeting with some of the other ranchers, trying to form a consortium to pressure you into selling. He's been telling them your ranch is barely solvent, that you're drowning in debt. Is any of that true? No. Caleb's mind was racing. I mean, money's tight, but it's always tight on a ranch. I'm not in danger of foreclosure. Then you need to prove it, publicly. Helen looked between them. There's a Cattlemen's Association meeting next week. You should come. Bring your books. Show everyone your ranch is solid. Take the wind out of Vance's sails before he convinces enough people to make a move. The thought of standing in front of 30 ranchers and defending his business made Caleb's stomach turn. But Helen was right. Silence had let Vance control the narrative. Time to change that. We'll be there, Evelyn said before Caleb could respond. Helen smiled. Good. And wear that spine you showed Vance this morning. You're going to need it. After Helen left, Caleb and Evelyn sat at the table with the ledgers spread between them. Evelyn had been managing the books for weeks now, and her organizational skills had transformed the chaos into something approaching coherent accounting. She walked him through the numbers, showing him profit margins and expense ratios and cash flow projections that proved the ranch was not only solvent, but actually turning a modest profit. This is good, Caleb said, staring at the figures. Better than I thought. Because you were keeping terrible records. Evelyn tapped a column of numbers. You were losing money on some cattle sales because you weren't tracking transport costs properly. And you were paying too much for feed because you weren't buying in bulk. I've renegotiated with 3 suppliers and consolidated your purchasing. You're saving about 15% across the board. He looked at her with something like awe. How did you learn to do this? Thomas's print shop. I managed all the finances while he focused on the actual printing. She closed the ledger. Money is just numbers. If you can read, you can manage accounts. It's not complicated. It just requires attention to detail. You're remarkable. You know that? She glanced up, surprise flickering across her face. I'm practical. You're both. He reached across the table and took her hand again, the gesture feeling more natural now. When we go to this meeting, I want you to present the books. You understand them better than I do. They'll never accept that. A woman presenting financial records to a room full of ranchers? Then they'll have to get used to it. His voice was firm. You did the work. You should get the credit. And if they can't handle that, they're fools. The meeting was 5 days away. They spent that time preparing, reviewing the numbers until Evelyn could recite them from memory, practicing how she'd present the information, anticipating questions and objections. Caleb's shoulder healed slowly but steadily, and true to her word, Evelyn kept him from overworking it by taking on tasks he'd normally do herself. She learned to saddle horses and move cattle and fix fence. Caleb watched her transform from a city seamstress into something harder, more weathered, more at home in this landscape. She still wore her dark dresses, still pinned her hair back severely, but there was new confidence in how she moved through the world, like she was claiming space instead of apologizing for occupying it. The night before the meeting, they sat on the porch watching the sun set in spectacular shades of orange and purple. The heat had broken slightly, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage and distant rain. "Are you nervous?" Caleb asked. "Terrified." Evelyn didn't look at him. "What if they laugh? What if Vance tears apart our numbers and makes us look foolish? Then we'll deal with it together." He shifted in his chair to face her. "But I don't think that'll happen. You're too thorough, and even if it does, even if this goes badly, we'll still have each other. The ranch. This." He gestured at the prairie spreading endlessly before them. "You really believe that? That this is enough?" "I'm starting to." He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together in what was becoming a habit. "A month ago, I was just existing, going through motions. Now I wake up and there's coffee made and breakfast cooking and 100 small signs that someone else lives here, that I'm not alone. That's worth more than I know how to say." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I need to tell you something. Something I've been avoiding." His chest tightened. "All right. Before I came here, I had other options. Not many, but some." She stared out at the darkening prairie. "There was a man in Philadelphia, older, wealthy. He'd been courting me, if you can call it that, for almost a year, sending gifts, writing letters. He proposed 3 times. Jealousy, sharp and unexpected, lanced through Caleb's chest. "Why didn't you accept?" "Because he didn't want a wife. He wanted a curiosity, something damaged he could keep and display. Proof of his own magnanimity." Her voice was bitter. "He'd talk about my scars like they were interesting, like they made me more valuable somehow because I was different. He'd bring friends by to meet me, show me off like I was something he'd collected. It was disgusting. But you still considered it." "I was desperate, and part of me thought maybe that was all I deserved, to be someone's interesting broken thing rather than someone's actual partner." She finally looked at him. "But then I saw your advertisement, and it was so honest. You weren't looking for beauty or interesting damage. You just wanted someone capable, someone real. And I thought maybe, just maybe, I could be that." "You are that." Caleb squeezed her hand. "More than that. Don't." She cut him off gently. "Don't make me into something I'm not. I'm difficult and blunt, and I don't suffer fools. I'm not going to be a perfect frontier wife who smiles and nods and makes everyone comfortable. I'm going to speak my mind and challenge you, and probably make enemies in town because I can't keep my mouth shut when I see injustice." "Good," he smiled. "I don't want perfect. I want you." The words hung between them, more significant than he'd meant them to be. Want, not need, not tolerate. Want. Active choice rather than passive acceptance. Evelyn's eyes searched his face. "You mean that?" "I do." He realized it was true as he said it. Somewhere between you reorganizing my spice shelf and telling Vance Crowley to go to hell, I stopped seeing this as an arrangement and started seeing it as, "What?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "A marriage, a real one. Not perfect, not without problems, but real." He stood, drawing her up with him. "And I know we said no expectations, no pressure, but I need to ask, is that something you could want too? Not the contract version, the real version." For a long moment, she just looked at him, her scarred face beautiful in the twilight, her dark eyes reflecting the last of the sun. Then she stepped closer, closing the space between them until they were nearly touching. "I stopped thinking of this as an arrangement the day you chose to keep me despite being shocked by my face," she said quietly. "Everything since then has just been me trying to figure out if what I was feeling was real or just gratitude for basic decency." "And what are you feeling?" "Terrified. Hopeful. Like maybe I found something I didn't know I was looking for." She reached up with her free hand and touched his face, her fingers tracing his jaw. "Like maybe you did too." Caleb bent his head, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met in a kiss that was tentative at first, testing. then deeper as they both leaned in. It felt like falling and flying at once, like something breaking open and something else beginning. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "Well," he managed, "that was overdue," she finished. They stood like that on the porch, wrapped around each other, while the prairie darkened and stars began to emerge. Tomorrow they'd face the Cattlemen's Association and whatever challenges that brought. But tonight, they had this, honest and imperfect and more real than either of them had expected. And for now, that was enough. They rode into town the next morning with the ledger secured in a leather satchel and a shared determination that felt almost reckless. The Cattlemen's Association met in the back room of the saloon, a detail that made Evelyn raise her eyebrows, but say nothing. She'd dressed in her most severe black dress, hair pinned back tight enough to make her scalp ache, and she carried herself with the kind of rigid dignity that dared anyone to comment. The room fell silent when they walked in. 30 men in various states of weathered prosperity, all turning to stare at the woman who'd just invaded their territory. Vance Crowley sat near the front, his expression smug. Mrs. Patterson's husband, the banker, sat beside him looking uncomfortable. Other faces Caleb recognized from town, some friendly, some neutral, some openly hostile. "Gentlemen," Caleb's voice carried across the room, "I believe we're expected." The association president, a grizzled rancher named Tom Brennan, who'd been working this land since before Montana was a state, gestured to 2 empty chairs. "Caleb, ma'am, we were just discussing water rights. Have a seat. We'll get to ranch finances shortly." They sat. Evelyn placed the satchel on her lap and kept her hands folded over it, her posture perfect, her face expressionless. Caleb could feel the tension radiating from her, but no one else would have noticed. She'd learned to hide fear behind stillness. The meeting dragged through mundane business, water access disputes, fencing agreements, collective purchasing of supplies. Evelyn listened intently, occasionally making notes on a small pad she'd brought. Several men kept glancing at her, clearly uncertain about her presence but unwilling to challenge it openly. Finally, Tom Brennan cleared his throat. "All right, let's address the elephant in the room. Vance, you called this special session because you had concerns about the Harlan Ranch's solvency. You want to explain why?" Vance stood, playing to the room. "It's no secret that Caleb's been struggling since Catherine passed. The ranch has been barely operational. I've heard from suppliers that bills are going unpaid, that he's behind on deliveries, that the cattle numbers are down significantly from previous years." He looked directly at Caleb. "I'm not saying this to be cruel. I'm saying it because we all depend on each other in this valley. One failing ranch affects us all. I think it's time we discuss options." "Options like selling to you?" Caleb kept his voice level. "If that's what's best for everyone involved." Vance's smile was thin. "You're in over your head, Caleb. There's no shame in admitting it." "May I respond?" Evelyn's voice cut through the murmurs that had started. Every head turned. Tom Brennan looked uncertain. "Mrs. Harlan, this is usually a closed meeting. Then why am I here?" She stood, pulling the ledgers from the satchel. "My husband asked me to present our financial records because I've been managing them. If you want to discuss the Harlan Ranch's solvency, you'll be discussing it with me." Vance laughed. "You're going to let your wife speak for you, Caleb? That's even more pathetic than I thought." "I'm going to let the person who knows the numbers best present them." Caleb stood beside Evelyn, his shoulder touching hers. "If that bothers you, Vance, you're welcome to leave." Tom Brennan considered for a moment, then nodded. "All right, Mrs. Harlan has the floor." Evelyn moved to the front of the room, opened the first ledger, and began. Her voice was steady, professional, with none of the warmth she showed at home. She walked them through income and expenses, showing profit margins that were healthy, if not spectacular. She explained the supply chain improvements she'd implemented, the renegotiated contracts, the consolidated purchasing that had cut costs without sacrificing quality. She presented cattle sales records that proved herd numbers were actually up from the previous year, not down as Vance had claimed. "Mr. Crowley mentioned unpaid bills," she said, flipping to another page. "I've brought receipts. Every supplier we work with is paid in full and on time. If there are rumors otherwise, I'd be interested to know their source." Her eyes found Vance. Perhaps someone's been spreading misinformation. Or perhaps you've cooked the books. Vance's voice had gone hard. Easy enough to make numbers say what you want when no one's checking them. Then check them. Evelyn held out the ledger. Anyone here is welcome to examine our records. We have nothing to hide. The banker, Patterson, cleared his throat. Mrs. Harlan, I'd need to see actual bank statements to verify. Of course. She pulled a folder from the satchel. 3 months of statements from your bank, showing deposits and withdrawals that correspond exactly to what's in the ledgers. I thought you might ask. Patterson took the folder, scanned the contents, and his eyebrows rose. These are solid numbers. Better than solid, actually. The Harlan Ranch is one of our more reliable accounts. That's impossible, Vance sputtered. I've talked to suppliers. Which suppliers? Evelyn's voice cracked like a whip. Give me names, because if someone's been telling you the Harlan Ranch isn't paying its bills, they're either lying or confused, and I'd like to know which. Vance's face went red. He looked around the room, clearly expecting support, but found only curious stares. This is ridiculous. You people are going to take the word of some scarred mail-order bride over a respected member of this community? The room went very quiet. Several men shifted uncomfortably. Tom Brennan's expression went cold. Careful, Vance, Tom said quietly. Why? It's true. Vance was spiraling now, his composure cracking. Caleb bought himself a wife because no decent woman would have him after Catherine. And now we're supposed to believe this. This damaged woman knows more about ranching than men who've been doing it for decades? Caleb started to move forward, but Evelyn held up one hand, stopping him. When she spoke, her voice was soft and deadly calm. You're right about one thing, Mr. Crowley. I am damaged. I have scars that will never heal, that make people uncomfortable, that mark me as different. She moved closer to him, and to his credit, or perhaps his shock, he didn't back away. But those scars didn't take my brain. They didn't take my ability to read, to calculate, to manage a household and a business. They just took the pretty face that men like you require before you'll consider a woman worth listening to. Oh, she opened another ledger, this one with different handwriting. These are your ranch's figures from last year's association report. Would you like me to read them aloud? Because I notice your profit margins are about half of ours, your supply costs are inflated, and you're carrying significantly more debt. Which makes me wonder if your interest in buying our land has less to do with our failure and more to do with your own. Dead silence. Vance's face had gone from red to white. You have no right. It's public record, filed with the association. Evelyn closed the ledger. I did my research before coming here. I wanted to understand who I'd be dealing with. And what I found is a man who's been slowly failing for 3 years and looking for someone to blame. Someone to rescue him by selling at a discount. She turned to address the room. The Harlan Ranch is solvent, more than solvent. We're profitable, responsible, and growing. If anyone here wants to verify that, our books are open. But I won't stand here and be insulted by a man whose own failures are driving his desperation. She returned to her seat beside Caleb, leaving Vance standing alone at the front looking like he'd been gutted. Tom Brennan broke the silence with a dry cough. Well, I think that settles the question of the Harlan Ranch's solvency. He looked at Vance. You got anything else to add, or are we done here? Vance looked around the room, saw no support coming, and stalked out. The door slammed behind him hard enough to rattle the windows. Several men laughed nervously. Patterson was still studying the bank statements with a bemused expression. Mrs. Harlan, Tom Brennan said, that was the most thorough financial presentation this association has seen in 20 years. Well done. Other men murmured agreement. A few came forward to look at the ledgers, asking questions about her organizational system and cost-cutting measures. By the time they left the saloon an hour later, 3 other ranchers had asked if Evelyn would be willing to look at their books and offer advice. They climbed into the wagon in silence. Caleb gathered the reins, but before he could signal the horses, he turned to Evelyn. She was staring straight ahead, her hands clenched in her lap, her entire body rigid. Evelyn? Not yet. Her voice was tight. Get us out of town first. He drove. They made it about a mile down the road before she broke. Her hands started shaking, then her shoulders, then her whole body. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop and reached for her. She collapsed against him, not crying but trembling so hard her teeth chattered. "You were magnificent," he said into her hair. "I was terrified. I thought I'd vomit." The words came out muffled against his chest. "Did you see their faces? They were ready to dismiss me before I even opened my mouth. But you didn't let them. You stood there and made them listen." He pulled back enough to see her face. "You destroyed Vance's credibility in front of everyone who matters. That took courage I don't even have words for. I just did what needed doing." But she was smiling now, shaky but real. "Did you see Patterson's face when he realized our numbers were better than most of his other accounts?" "I saw." Caleb kissed her forehead. "I also saw you threaten to read Vance's private finances aloud. That was inspired. That was desperation. I was bluffing. Those numbers were from public filings, not his actual books." She laughed, the sound edged with hysteria. But he didn't know that. They sat there in the stopped wagon, holding each other while the prairie breathed around them. Finally, Evelyn pulled back and straightened her dress. "We should go home," she said. "I need to lie down for about 3 days." "You earned it." He kissed her again, longer this time, tasting relief and pride and something deeper that he was still learning to name. Then he clicked to the horses and they rolled toward home. The ranch came into view as the sun climbed toward noon. Solid house, weathered barn, fences she'd mended standing strong. Caleb looked at it and realized it didn't feel empty anymore. Didn't feel haunted. It felt like what it was supposed to be. A place where two people were building a life together, imperfect and real. They spent the afternoon in quiet celebration. Evelyn changed out of her severe dress into something more comfortable and made lunch while Caleb tended the horses. They ate on the porch, watching the prairie shimmer with heat, not saying much because everything important had already been said in that saloon and in the wagon afterward. Later, Caleb found her in the garden behind the house, pulling weeds with methodical intensity. He watched her for a moment. This woman who'd traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger, who'd faced down his town's judgment with unflinching courage, who'd taken his empty house and filled it with purpose. His wife, not in name only anymore, but in truth. "Evelyn?" She looked up, shading her eyes against the sun. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Everything's right." He moved into the garden, careful not to step on the plants she'd been nurturing. "I need to say something, and I need you to hear it." She stood, brushing dirt from her hands, suddenly wary. "All right. This morning, when Vance called you damaged, I wanted to kill him. Not because he was wrong, you are scarred, that's just fact, but because he used it as a weapon. As proof you weren't worth listening to." Caleb took her hands. "And I realized I'd been doing the same thing. Not with words, but with silence. Every time I didn't respond to gossip, every time I didn't defend us publicly, I was confirming what they thought, that I'd settled, that this marriage was charity." "Caleb, let me finish." He squeezed her hands. "When you asked if I regretted marrying you, I couldn't give you a clean answer because part of me was still scared. Scared of failing again, scared of wanting too much, scared of admitting this was real. But watching you today, seeing you stand in front of those men and refuse to be dismissed, I'm done being scared. I'm done being silent." He pulled her closer, close enough that he could see gold flecks in her dark eyes. "I don't regret marrying you. I'm grateful for it. You're the best thing that's happened to me in years, and the only thing I regret is all the time I wasted being afraid when I could have been choosing you, actively, loudly, in front of everyone who matters." Tears welled in her eyes. "You're going to make me cry." "Good. You've earned it." He brushed a thumb across her scarred cheek. "I love you, Evelyn. Not in spite of anything. Not with conditions, just love. All of it. The fierce competence and the bluntness and the way you reorganize everything you touch. The scars are part of you, not separate from you, and I love all of it." She did cry then, silent tears tracking down both cheeks. "I love you too. I've been trying not to, trying to keep it practical and safe, but I can't. You're stubborn and emotionally constipated and terrible at bookkeeping, and I love you anyway." He laughed, pulling her fully against him. "Emotionally constipated? You spent 3 weeks not talking about feelings." She wrapped her arms around his neck. "That's constipation." "Fair point." He kissed her. tasting salt and sunshine, and the beginning of something neither of them had planned, but both were choosing. So what now? Now we go inside and have dinner. And maybe after dinner, we stop pretending we need separate bedrooms. She said it matter-of-factly, but her cheeks were flushed. If you want. I want. His voice came out rougher than he'd intended. I've wanted for weeks. I just didn't know how to ask. You don't have to ask. We're married. Actually married now, not just legally. She took his hand and led him toward the house. And I'm tired of sleeping alone when the person I want is 30 feet away. That night, after dinner and dishes, and the sun sinking below the horizon, Evelyn climbed the stairs with Caleb's hand in hers. They stopped at her door out of habit, then she kept walking, pulling him toward his room instead. Their room now. The thought made her breathless. Inside, Caleb lit a lamp while she stood by the window looking out at the prairie gone silver under moonlight. She heard him come up behind her, felt his hand settle on her shoulders. You're nervous, he said quietly. Yes. No point lying. It's been 4 years since... And Thomas and I, we were good together, but it was different, familiar. This is new. His hands moved gently, no pressure. We can wait. There's no rush. I don't want to wait. She turned to face him. I'm just nervous because this matters. You matter, and I want to do this right. There's no right. There's just us. He cupped her scarred cheek with such tenderness it made her throat tight. And we've got all the time in the world to figure it out. She kissed him then, stopping words with action, pouring everything she couldn't say into the press of lips and the tangle of hands. He responded with careful passion, letting her set the pace, following her lead as they learned each other. And when they finally fell into bed together, it was awkward and earnest and imperfect, exactly like everything else between them, which somehow made it perfect in its own way. Later, wrapped in sheets with moonlight painting patterns on the walls, Evelyn traced circles on Caleb's chest and felt more at home than she'd felt anywhere in 4 years. I'm not leaving, she said into the darkness. I know. Not because I have nowhere else to go, because this is where I want to be. She propped herself up to look at him. This ranch, this house, this life. You. I choose all of it. Good. He pulled her back down against him. Because I'm choosing you right back. For as long as you'll have me. That's a long time. I'm counting on it. They slept tangled together, and when morning came with rooster crow and golden light, Evelyn woke in Caleb's arms and felt the last pieces of fear finally let go. This was real. This was lasting. This was home. The summer deepened into the kind of heat that made work difficult and evenings precious. They fell into new rhythms, waking together, working apart, coming back together for meals and conversation and the simple comfort of shared space. The ranch thrived under their combined attention. Cattle fattened on good grass. Fences stood straight and strong. The books balanced with room to spare. Towns slowly adjusted to them. Mrs. Patterson's influence waned after several women asked Evelyn for advice on household management and found her helpful rather than threatening. Sarah Chen hired her to redesign the general store's inventory system, which resulted in better organization and increased sales. Father Callahan invited them to a community dinner where Evelyn's forthright opinions on education and women's rights scandalized half the attendees and delighted the other half. Vance Crowley tried once more to cause trouble, spreading rumors about impropriety and questioning Caleb's masculinity for letting his wife handle business. Helen Morrison shut him down with a public dressing down in the middle of the church yard that left him red-faced and silent. After that, he mostly avoided them, his own ranch's struggles becoming more apparent as he had less time to focus on others. By late August, with the prairie turned gold and the air carrying the first hints of autumn, Caleb and Evelyn sat on their porch watching the sun set in spectacular fashion. The garden had produced more vegetables than they could use, so they'd been sharing with neighbors and putting up preserves for winter. The house was full of jars gleaming like jewels on pantry shelves, tangible proof of abundance. I was thinking, Caleb said, his hand finding hers automatically, we should host a harvest dinner. Invite people from town. Show off what we've built here. That's very social of you. Evelyn smiled. What happened to the hermit who barely left his ranch? He married a woman who won't let him hide. He squeezed her hand, and he realized hiding was just another form of dying. I'd rather live. Then we'll host a dinner. She leaned her head on his shoulder. But I'm not cooking for 30 people by myself. I'll help. We'll make it a joint effort. He kissed the top of her head. Like everything else. The dinner happened 2 weeks later on a perfect September evening. 20 people came, more than they'd expected. They set up tables in the yard, strings of lanterns overhead, and served roasted chicken and fresh vegetables and bread Evelyn had taught Caleb to make. Helen Morrison brought pies. Sarah Chen brought wine. Emma Rodriguez brought her guitar and played while people ate and talked and laughed. Mrs. Patterson came, surprisingly, though she spent most of the evening looking uncomfortable. At one point, she approached Evelyn with what appeared to be genuine contrition. "I owe you an apology," she said stiffly. "I was unkind. When you first arrived, I made assumptions that weren't fair." Evelyn studied her, looking for the catch. "What changed?" "My daughter." Mrs. Patterson's voice softened. "She's been unhappy in her marriage for years. Her husband treats her like furniture. When I told her about you, about how you manage the ranch and speak your mind, she said she wished she could be more like that, less worried about what people think, more willing to demand respect." She paused. "Made me realize I've been teaching her the wrong lessons, that being proper isn't the same as being strong." "No, it's not." Evelyn kept her voice gentle. "But it takes courage to admit that. Thank you." Mrs. Patterson nodded and drifted away, leaving Evelyn to marvel at the strange directions life could take. She found Caleb talking to Tom Brennan about winter preparations and slipped her hand into his. He pulled her close without breaking conversation, the gesture so natural now it required no thought. As the evening deepened and stars emerged, people began to leave with thanks and promises to return the invitation. Finally, it was just Caleb and Evelyn cleaning up in the lantern light, gathering dishes and extinguishing lights. "That went well," Caleb said, carrying a stack of plates toward the house. "Better than well. People enjoyed themselves." Evelyn followed with leftover food. "And more importantly, they saw us. Really saw us. Not the gossip version, the real version. Which is? Two people who found each other at the right time, who built something good out of loneliness and practicality, and eventually, love." She set down the food and turned to face him. "We're not a scandal anymore, Caleb. We're just us. A married couple. Normal and boring. I don't think we'll ever be boring." He pulled her close, swaying slightly like they were dancing, though there was no music. "But I'll take normal. Normal sounds perfect." They finished cleaning and went inside to the house that had stopped feeling empty months ago. In their bedroom, theirs now, completely, no separate spaces or careful boundaries, they got ready for bed with the comfortable familiarity of people who'd learned each other's rhythms. Caleb watched Evelyn brush her hair, the lamplight catching in the dark strands, and felt a contentment so profound it almost hurt. This woman who'd stepped off a stagecoach with her face hidden and her expectations practical had become everything he hadn't known to want: partner, friend, lover, home. "What?" she asked, catching him staring in the mirror. "Just thinking about that day you arrived, how close I came to letting you leave." "You didn't, though." She set down the brush and came to sit beside him on the bed. "You made a different choice. We both did. Best choice I ever made." He took her hand, running his thumb over her knuckles. "I spent 3 years convinced I was done, that the best parts of my life were behind me. You proved me wrong. You proved yourself wrong." She kissed him softly. "I just gave you a reason to try. Then I'm grateful. For the trying, for the succeeding, for all of it." He pulled her down beside him, and they settled into the familiar tangle of limbs and comfort. "I love you, Evelyn Harlan." "I love you too." She fit herself against him, her scarred cheek resting on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "And I'm glad you're not afraid anymore." "I'm still afraid sometimes," he admitted, "of losing this, of failing you, of winter storms and drought and all the other things that can go wrong on a ranch." "Good. Fear means you're paying attention," she yawned, "but we'll face it together, whatever comes." "Together," he agreed, "always together." Outside, the prairie breathed under stars, vast and patient and indifferent to human drama. Inside, two people who'd each thought they were done with happiness curled around each other and slept the deep, peaceful sleep of people who'd found their way home. The years that followed brought the normal challenges of ranch life. Hard winters, dry summers, sick cattle, broken equipment, the endless work of keeping a place running. But they faced it together, their partnership deepening with each shared struggle and small victory. They added on to the house, built a new barn, expanded the herd. Evelyn's reputation as a financial manager spread, and she started consulting for other ranches, bringing in extra income that allowed them to save for future expansion. They never had children, though not for lack of trying. After a year, they accepted it wasn't going to happen and decided they were enough for each other. The ranch became their legacy instead, a place they built with their own hands and hearts, proof that sometimes the best families are the ones you choose. On their 5th anniversary, Caleb found Evelyn in the garden as the sun set and pulled her to her feet. "Come with me," he said. "I have something to show you." He led her to the porch where 2 new rocking chairs sat, positioned to face the prairie and the endless sky. Simple chairs, well made, exactly right. "I ordered them from the carpenter in town," he explained, "for sitting, for watching sunsets, for growing old together." Evelyn ran her hand over the smooth wood, then looked at him with eyes gone suspiciously bright. "They're perfect." "Sit with me?" He held out his hand. They sat in their new chairs and rocked gently, watching the sun paint the sky in impossible colors. Caleb reached over and took her hand, their fingers lacing together with the ease of long practice. "Do you ever regret it?" Evelyn asked softly. "Marrying me instead of waiting for someone easier. Every single day," he said. She started to pull her hand away, but he held tight. "I regret all the time I wasted being afraid before I let myself love you. I regret not standing up to Vance sooner, not defending us louder. I regret every moment I spent wishing this was simple when complicated turned out to be so much better." He turned to look at her fully. "But marrying you? That I've never regretted, not for 1 second, not even the hard parts. Especially not the hard parts, because those are what made us real." "Good answer." She smiled, the expression transforming her face the way it always did. "Because I don't regret it either. Not the journey here, not the fear, not even the scars that brought me to you. This life, our life, it's more than I ever thought I deserved." "You deserve everything." He brought her hand to his lips. "And I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you know it." They sat there as darkness fell and stars emerged, 2 people who'd found each other at the end of hope and built something lasting from the wreckage of their first attempts at love. The prairie stretched around them, vast and forgiving, witness to all the small ways they'd chosen each other every day since that first difficult morning when fear had almost won. But fear hadn't won. Love had messy, imperfect, hard-earned love that grew stronger with every passing year. And that, they both knew, was worth more than all the easy romances in the world.